the big contentious issue of how we tackle this is stop and search. Well, the moment you say that, the debate rages again about the justification for stop and search, whether you racially target certain groups and so on. Front page of the Telegraph, we've got to bring it back and bring it back hard.
Yeah.
And I've seen police chiefs up and down the country basically saying we need the power to do this.
And we have the power to do it, but let's not forget why police officers are reticent to use the power. It's because of the Prime Minister. When she was Home Secretary, she lambasted police officers for their use of stop and search. My colleagues are afraid to use this power, which does save lives. It takes knives off the street.
The argument against it is...
If you're a black man, you're 4 times more likely to be stopped and searched.
Now, the argument against that is that if you look at the victims and you look at the people accused of doing the killing in London, certainly, vast majority on both sides are young black males.
Absolutely.
So are we being, as Trevor Phillips said this week, a black man said this week, are we just, basically being too PC about all this? Should we just, wherever the problem lies, identify who is doing what to whom and target it aggressively, which in London would mean you would predominantly target, with stop and search, young black men who may be carrying knives. Can we even say that? Or is that racist?
We have to be far more honest about why we use stop and search and how we use stop and search. But let me be clear, as passionate as I am for stop and search, it's one of many tools that we must use. And it's not just a policing problem, it's far broader. But the Home Secretary said in Parliament yesterday that politicians need to support police officers using the tools they have. He was talking about stop and search. So we need to have an open and an honest conversation about stop and search. Yes, I understand why some communities feel that they may be targeted, but we need to look at the number of young black men who have been murdered on our streets.
A final point on this, but they obviously, we've had some of these community leaders in, from the black communities in London, for example, who say that, well, what about in Scotland, where in Glasgow they launched a massive clampdown on knife crime, predominantly being carried out by young white males against young white males, and it was very successful. In other words, it depends where you are, the demographic of those doing the killing and those being killed.
It does, and we have to be honest. And I would say to the community leaders or those who feel that they're being targeted, what is the alternative?
Right.
Because if we don't use stop and search, people will continue to use knives in the way they're doing. It's already a national crisis. We need to target it in as many ways as we can.
Well, one of the alternatives, of course, Grace, is you put much more money into those services which are going to help those young people before they even think about picking up a knife. And just on the stop and search, The Guardian commissioned analysis which shows that searches of black people were less likely to detect crime than those conducted on white people, and most stops found no wrongdoing. And David Lammy, of course, the Labour MP for Tottenham, says it disproportionately, unfairly targets young black men and destroys the trust between police and communities they serve, which I think is a critical point which mustn't be overlooked, because you need consent in order to police effectively.
Exactly. There is no evidence that stop and search works to deal with the fundamental driving issues of these problems. Firstly, there is that point about the fact that, often the people that are searched aren't the ones even carrying the knives, right? They will often have someone else carrying the knives for them, or they'll have left them somewhere else. But also, if you think about what policing is, it's supposed to be about relationships with communities, identifying where risks are. It's built on trust. And actually, what Theresa May doesn't want to talk about is the fact that this is an issue of social justice, social and economic injustice. When you look across all the countries all around the world, the single biggest predictor of violent crime is levels of inequality. Austerity has not just increased inequality, it has also completely eviscerated our capacity to deal with the...
Can I just say, forget all these big words that Grace is using. Look at these faces on this front page. Black young men. Most of them are black young men who've been murdered by knife crime, and a lot of them have been murdered by fellow black young men. That's why stop and search has to be carried out.
Well, let's also look at a piece. All right.
You can use all this very, very right-on language that Grace is using.
Just on that point.
It sounds very nice
on that point.
to moralise.
It's not very good, Grace. Grace, what's very nice about this? Look at this.
Then what is the point of having this conversation?
There's the evidence. There it is. Look at them.
Holding up a picture of them without actually looking at any of the underlying structural factors.
You are in denial. The typical response of the Liberal left.
Let me call time out. Let me just, on this point, go to a piece by Richard Cook, who's the chairman of the West Midlands Police Federation, I'd imagine a friend and colleague of yours. Indeed. And he says they've gone heavy on stop and search in Birmingham, implementing so-called Section 60 powers, enabling us to increase the numbers we stop and search by allowing us to do so within reasonable grounds. The impact has been tangible. The feeling among officers is that the operation is paying dividends across the city. Members of the public have been approaching my colleagues to praise what they see as welcome respite from what too often can be an aggressive atmosphere. Arrests are up. Dangerous weapons have been removed from the streets.
Scores of deadly
For too
weapons
long, police have been
removed.
absent from the streets in many numbers. This has encouraged a sense of licence among those carrying knives, whatever their initial motivation to do so. So my question for you, Grace, is, look, we can argue till the cows come home about effectiveness. The police say tangible results. You say the opposite.
In one case, yeah.
But
combined with community policing.
This happens across the
my
country,
question
Grace.
for you
Combined with community
my question
policing.
for you is this. If it's not stop and search, what are you going to suggest we do to stop hordes of young kids walking around the streets of major cities carrying knives?
You asked that, Piers, because let's look at this, right? You know, we've had a 93% increase in people being treated for stab wounds in hospitals across the UK over the last 5 years. Why has that happened, right? It's not just because you've suddenly not got as many police on the streets. It's because people are feeling the need and the desire to commit violent crime. Why do they feel the need and the desire to commit violent crime? It's to do with status, it's to do with gang membership, it's to do with inequality, and it's to do with the absence of any other kind of factors that could contain them and allow them to feel at home in their communities. We've got no youth services, they've all been cut. We've got academies that are kicking people out of school, no youth services for them to go to. We've got something that we're not talking about at all because no one cares about the kids in these positions, a crisis in children's social care. These are some of the most vulnerable children that are most likely to go on and commit these crimes.
I can agree with all you've just said.
So put more money into it.
No, I totally agree with you, right? And that's absolutely part of the problem. But there's also a chicken and the egg situation here. Right now, we have an ongoing current crisis of all these kids, for all the reasons that you may have just articulated, wandering around carrying knives.